All right, so welcome everyone to the seventh. This is the seventh MetaNet ICU meeting. If you anyone that's watching this that doesn't know what MetaNet ICU is, it's just a way to network, and it's a business here to help improve development around Bitcoin SV. This is our seventh meeting. I just went over the rules for all of you, but we have a couple of speakers here, so we're going to start off first with Brad. So Brad is in charge of the scaling test network, and he's going to talk a little bit just about. I know I didn't give you too much direction, Brad, so maybe I'll preface that. Maybe we could talk about, and you can go on however you want, but just generally, you can talk about the test network, how people can get involved in the test network, and then what I would like to hear at least is just maybe your thoughts on scaling. Obviously, so Bitcoin SV has released a lot of the roadmap and how we're going to get to pretty large scale comparatively to other blockchains. Maybe just your thoughts on scaling and how we can get there. And that's a pretty broad topic, but I'll let you speak just for a little bit, however much you want, and we can kind of go from there. And if people have questions, they can raise their hand or ask them in the chat.
Yeah, no worries. I just realized it's been quite a while since I read our own roadmap, so I should probably have a look at that. But yeah, so basically I'm heading up the Bitcoin scaling network, which you can get to at bitcoinscaling.io. The idea was to run this network in parallel with mainnet and testnet. So if you're looking to develop an application and you're not too worried about scale, just use the regular testnet. But if you are wanting to battle test your application or service to ensure that it's going to survive the adoption that we're aiming for, then the idea is to run it on the scaling test network. It's very simple to do. It's exactly the same process as if you wanted to run on the testnet. Is when you start up your Bitcoin node, you put an STN equals 1 instead of a testnet equals 1 into your configuration file. What we've been doing on it up until this point, you may have noticed or seen a couple of months ago, we did what ended up being about a week's worth of 128 meg blocks, which was pretty good. That was with a lot of help from the Satoshi Shotgun team, who we work closely with. We've now pivoted our direction a little bit because we know that we can max out blocks. Now we're looking at trying to emulate or simulate what the real world might look like on a scaled blockchain. So we're talking, you're not going to have full blocks 24/7. We're going to have periods of busy time, period of quiet time. You're going to get unexpected bursts of traffic, things like that. We might see 1 million transactions hit the network in a matter of seconds, or we might see 1 million transactions over a few hours. So we're just sort of looking at how we'd implement that and have the traffic on the scaling test network simulate some sort of organic process or flow. So I think we're looking at it now. We're sitting on about 20 meg blocks over the last 24 hours. And I know that Eston at the Satoshi Shotgun team is currently testing a few things and changing a few things. So we might start to see some very spiky graphs happening. So yeah, basically our goal is to try and get any Bitcoin SV developers who are building public-facing services, especially, to jump on the scaling test network for all their development. So like what we saw the other day with the well overblown reorg issue, which was not really that much of an issue in the end. If Unwriter maybe had run his tools on scaling test network, maybe he would have discovered what he discovered from that prior. So we're just trying to create that sort of situation where you can know what's coming before it happens on the main net, where real money could be lost in future. So a lot of big thing to note is right now the scaling test network is run with pretty much the same code that the mainnet is running on. We do have something that Steve Shatters has talked about a bit, is the mining API, and Daniel I think has talked about it a bit. We do have the new mining API running on at least our mining nodes here. So to give a quick rundown of what that is basically a way of getting mining candidates out to the miners which do not require sending the entire block over RPC. So the traditional way was you call the Bitcoin node and it would send you everything you need to create a block template for your miners to then go mine, which meant sending double the size of the next block. So if you had a 128 meg block, you had to send 256 meg through the RPC protocol, which obviously doesn't scale too great. And it was actually Andrew Stone and one of his colleagues that came up with the original idea for this mining API. And BU has their version of it running, and we did have a branch of that in SV, but we've taken it a bit further, and we're hoping that'll be ready for the next release to make mining big blocks easier. So that's one thing to look forward to. We've got the SV teams also been working a lot on things like parallel transaction validation. I'm not 100% sure the status of that, if that's going to make the next release in its full glory or not. But yeah, the idea is that we make use of that on the STN as soon as we can, and to start seeing some measurements coming out of that as well. So I suppose on that, we'll move to how to get involved. I have written a couple of basic guides on the Bitcoin scaling website to getting started and how to mine. So if you follow the getting started guide, it's pretty much the same setup you'd run for running any kind of Bitcoin node, whether that's on actual Bitcoin network or any of the altcoins. And once you're up and running, then you feel free to treat it as you would mainnet or testnet. We do have one point of difference with the scaling test network, is that we will from time to time do a reset. So we already have done one in March. The blockchain on the scaling test network, because we were doing continuous 128 meg blocks, got to about 700 gig or something like that. And there was just no need to keep all that taking up this space. So we rolled back the blockchain to block 2950, which made the blockchain, I think it was about 700 kilobytes or something. Because yeah, we were putting 18 gig a day into the chain at one point. So we can see that we can do it, hence we've now pivoted our direction. And we are planning to go bigger again with the next release. I won't say how much bigger just yet, but we are going to go bigger than 512, hopefully.
Well, that's great. That's actually a lot of information. So I think actually Tone's notes, that's a great question. So can we use the scaling test network to test non-standard scripts, big nums, other limits removed, as they're going to be next February? And maybe a better question would be, when could we expect support for that?
Okay, so non-standard scripts you can do, because it's the same as testnet, and testnet allows non-standard scripts. So you can do those today. Big nums, they're not supported yet in Bitcoin SV node, and there's a lot of work to get that back in. But certainly once that work is done, you'll probably see it first on STN. Just because the benefit of running the STN is that we can test, the unstable code, the unproven code. We can run it while it's going through QA, because it doesn't matter if the STN crashes. I just have to restart it again. There's no risk of monetary loss. There's no risk of services or applications going down. So yeah, that is part of the goal, is anything possibly breaking or new developments will be battle tested here first. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, support for non-standard scripts, you can do that today, and big nums and other limits, as they're removed, it's going to be just as the work gets done.
So I guess another question here. So how much disk should we make available to a system from a planning point of view? Is 1 terabyte enough? Yeah, so today 1 terabyte would be plenty, because we have stopped just trying to fill blocks, and we're now looking at organic traffic simulation. You can also run your node in prune mode. So then you can run it with as little as 10 or 15 gig if you really want to, but I sort of recommend to go for at least 160 gig disk space. Gives you quite a bit of leeway until we get much past that, and then you'll need to either prune your node, or that's when you need a terabyte or so of space available. Again,
this is going to depend on what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to create a block explorer, you're probably going to need the full archival node. You're probably going to need a terabyte or more, especially down the track when we start testing gigabyte blocks. Like if you're doing 144 gigabyte blocks, you need 144 gig a day basically. But if you're trying to build pretty much any other application or service, I can't see a reason why you'd need to run a full node. So if you run in prune mode, you can tell Bitcoin how much space it's allowed to use basically, and it'll try to stay within that.
I'll ask a couple other questions just because I had a great conversation with you in London, and I think I would hope that other people could at least maybe hear some of the stuff that. So I'll ask you two questions. Number one, I would actually like to hear your thoughts about Miner API and generally your rebuttal to people that what do they call it? What do they call it? Miner. That a miner API is equivalent to. Well, I can't even remember what they call this. What is the criticism there?
Permission mining. Are you talking about Miner ID?
Yes. Sorry, Miner ID. Sorry, not Miner APIs. Miner ID. I'd like to hear your thoughts on why Miner ID is not permission mining isn't a concern, and then I'll save my other questions. So yeah.
Okay, so basically, Miner ID is a way for a miner to signal many things. First of all, their identity, if they want to. So they don't have to signal, their name, address, location, and anything like that. They don't need to ask anyone permission to mine. And you can regenerate a new ID whenever you feel the need to. So the idea is to create some sort of a reputation to a miner, and to enable miners to be able to communicate with each other, to set up, the small world network, to power Bitcoin, to get them aware of each other's presence at the very least. And then an extension of that is allow miners to advertise what mining services they offer. So down the track, if we're looking at, the removal of non-standard transactions, then maybe some miners, for whatever reason, don't want to keep a full blockchain. Maybe some other miners are happy to take your computationally heavy transactions, whereas others only want to process cash to cash transactions. So the Miner ID will allow wallets or exchanges or other application services to ask the miners directly, hey, will you take this type of transaction and how much will you charge for it? So it get very easy. I mean, it's sort of a bit of a manual process to think about at the moment, but once all this stuff has been established and built, it's going to be fairly automated. Like your wallet's going to know, all right, I'm sending this particular transaction. Let's go ask, these 4 miners and who's the cheapest. And we're just incentivizing the transaction propagation. And the reason that it doesn't create any sort of centralized, mining or permission mining or whatever other rubbish they come up with is that no one's going to tell you can and can't do anything. And it's all about driving competition. It's not like nChain or Calvin or anyone is going to be able to sit there and say, no, your block isn't good enough, and we're the cartel who rule, because it would be not in their best interest, whether it's Calvin or nChain or any other party. Like if they start orphaning blocks that the rest don't agree with, then they're going to get left out themselves.
Yeah, perfect. And then my other question for you would be, if you could just comment on I guess a twofold question would be, we saw the recent, the 6-block reorg that people seem to think is a problem. I guess I'd like to hear you, I think Shatters had a great article about this, but maybe you could just talk about reorgs in general, but then also that process of scaling and, I guess to you, as someone who's kind of on the inside of this, what is a realistic timeline for scale? And I'm not holding you to anything, I guess, but generically, yeah.
Well, I think Steve said it best in his article, put much more thought and articulation into it than I could. But it was a lot of PR, a lot of media around that, which as soon as I saw it happening, I was like, yeah, this is gonna blow up, as everything in Bitcoin and crypto does. But I think Steve pointed out that there was no point where the competing chains were more than two blocks apart, or two. There was no point of more than two orphans, which is exactly how Bitcoin's supposed to work. The fact that we got to six reals or whatever it's dubbed as doesn't really matter, because of those 6 blocks in competition, all the transactions were included in them, as far as we know, and a lot of people have spent much more time looking into this than I have. So it's sort of a non sequitur, like people are going to arc up about it because it confirms their narrative and that sort of thing, but the facts are the facts, and Bitcoin works.
Perfect. Yeah. I guess I'll just open it up. I mean, does anyone have any questions for Brad about, I guess, anything? I'll put you on the spot for any questions, but maybe also just about the test network or scaling questions. Maybe I'll give anyone some time there to ask any questions. You can either unmute yourself and ask it, or you can post it in the chat. I'll give it a second. I think this is great, Brad. I think you should speak more. That's my opinion. But I mean that only because I will reiterate. I don't think I've gotten to talk to you much since, but I had some great conversations with you in London. So that was my feeling. And there's a lot of people here that we also were in London. So I had the feeling that a lot of people that I understand the desire to not want to talk though, but
Yeah.
your insights at least. That's all I'll say there. Yeah.
No, London was really good actually. I put a bunch more names to faces in the nChain office as well. Actually, I hadn't met any of them really in person, so no, that was a very good experience, and hopefully get to do it again soon.
Yeah. So we do have a question that I don't know if this is your area of expertise, but are you able to talk about Terranode a little bit at all?
Certainly, Daniel and Steve know a lot more about Terranode at this point. I sort of was there in the beginning talks for Terranode, but what I do know is that we're sort of changing the way that people have thought about how a Bitcoin node should work. We'll be building it from the ground up, and I'll probably leave it more to Daniel and Steve to talk on those points.
Sure. Okay. So I guess if anyone does have any more questions for Brad, you can post them in the chat, or we can circle back. Jack Lou was supposed to be here. I don't know if he's hiding here. He said he was going to listen in, but join in a bit. I don't know if he's hiding out here or not, but under a different name. I don't know if I thought that was him maybe in the the nickname that was popped in earlier, but I guess not. So we have to give him some time here. I don't know if he is going to join or not. But I guess maybe I'll just take the time. Okay, so here you go, Brad. I'll ask you one more question. Are you Unwriter?
No. I have no idea who or what they are.
All right, perfect. I will just, I guess, reiterate again, since this is recorded, I guess I would like to at least plug what we are as a, what this organization thing is. So I will give a personal testimony. So obviously Joel has started this MetaNet ICU business, and it's centered around the idea of, I guess, bringing people together to work on Bitcoin related things and to talk about Bitcoin related things. My own personal testimony would be, I've learned a numerous, I'm sure I don't speak for just myself in here, but I've learned a numerous amount of things about Bitcoin that wasn't really possible without the people that are in this circle of learning, I suppose. So again, people that are listening, that's what the point of this is. And if you're interested in joining this, you can go to metanet.icu and join the forums, and you can find your way into the Slack channel and all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, I don't know if Jack is joining or if he's here. I might try and ping him, but maybe I will pass the ball. So Ken, I think you're in this group. You did ask to give a plug on what you're working on, so I'll give you the opportunity now if you'd like to. I don't know if you are prepared or not, but I think Ken said he's working on a token project if you want to fill some time, any interest in talking about identity? Could you clarify what you mean by identity? I'm happy to talk about whatever, but I don't.
I know a number of people are promising specs or releases having to do with identity systems. And I guess I've got some of my own thinking on that. And I'm curious if anyone's just kicking around the shape or the timing or key characteristics that are being considered. To me, it's one of the key capabilities that's lacking to get a lot of other things going. Like you can't even have a file that supports updates unless the file belongs to somebody. So the file, needs an owner, and an owner means an identity, and an identity in Bitcoin means something that can be theoretically sold. If it's a private key, it has to be a key that supports a threshold signature scheme to transition it to somebody else's ownership. So it quickly gets complicated, but I don't know. I certainly haven't put the thought into fleshing something out myself, but I'm definitely feeling the desire to have something emerge. And if it doesn't happen from somewhere else, it's something I'm interested in working on or talking about.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. So you do have I guess we won't out who that is, but in the chat you have someone interested in talking to you about that. I guess a couple people are working on this, so maybe you're not alone in this, but that's an interesting concept, right? Because I think right now, I think the only thing we have close to that would be, Money Button, I guess, right? Money Button has some kind of concept of linking.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
My own thought is that the identity is essentially a private key, and that, for example, if you wanted to associate your Twitter handle with some key, you first would need a wallet that would manage identities. So addresses obviously are worth much more if they're associated with an identity private key rather than just an anonymous one or an arbitrary spending one. But then you could potentially go to the Twitter website, and in your profile page, if Twitter supported it, they could endorse your identity with your Twitter handle, with the money button right there on the Twitter profile page, ideally. For 10 cents, Twitter will say, sure, this identity is associated with Tone's Notes. And we could both incentivize other major social media websites to play ball by schemes where people could do it voluntarily. And since you would just be pretending that was your handle, somebody might squat on your Twitter name, you could outbid them, and eventually that money could flow to the social media website as an incentive for them to support it. So, for example, if John, grabbed my Twitter handle, I could outbid whatever his record in the blockchain paid for that record, and all that money would accumulate until finally Twitter said, "Oh, there's $10,000 sitting there if we support this." Of course, they're not going to move for that, but so the money button could factor into it. There are aspects of identity that I'm not even thinking about in that quick.
Well, Ryan and his team are actually working on an identity system, and he hasn't really spoken very much about how it works, but I have the feeling he's going to do a pretty good job at it.
There's Jack. Hey, Jack. Very much looking forward to Ryan's reveal.
I think we should circle back to this because that's actually, I think it's a really interesting concept for sure. There's probably a lot to talk about there. Jack, thank you for joining. I will introduce you. I appreciate you joining, hopping on it. Jack didn't really know what this is all about at all. And it probably was a little weird explaining what this is. So I've talked about it a little bit in this meeting, but Jack, basically we are just a group of people in Bitcoin SV. And what I was hoping Jack could talk about for all of you guys is obviously the whole delist Bitcoin SV thing has been in the news, and I think Jack kind of championed the prominence of saying maybe there's a a market solution to not allowing Bitcoin SV to dwindle away. So Jack, I know you're working on a couple of things, whether it's Float SV or Relay. I don't want to, you're allowed to talk about however much of anything that you want, but maybe if you could just comment on the delisting, I guess, campaigns that have been going on, how that sparked maybe, what you guys are doing over at Float or Relay, and maybe whatever else you could share, however much you want to talk about. So again, I appreciate you joining. Again, I know you don't know too much about what this is all about, but it's just very casual conversation here. So thanks again for hopping on. Yeah. And I'll unmute you. I think you're muted right now, but I'll make sure you're unmuted. So. Yeah.
Hey everyone. Hopefully I fit in here on this show. So happy to be on. You guys can hear me okay?
Yep, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, in terms of the delisting, I think in some ways it was a surprise. In some ways it wasn't, because in some ways BSV wasn't even supposed to be listed. I know going into the fork conversations, it wasn't clear that exchanges were going to list it back in November. So when I was at Poloniex, we listed it 7 days before the fork happened. And the backdrop there was, when Bitcoin forked in 2017, that was the number one asset in the crypto industry. And backed by sort of a lot of Chinese supporters at the time of BCH, the Chinese miners, etc. And a lot of the big exchanges based in China, they were very enthusiastic about potentially offering a fork product then. Leading into November, it was much less obvious why people who were not in the know, and no fault to the exchange, a lot of exchanges didn't know what was going on, why they should care about this fork product. So you can see even November 15, 16, I think when Kraken listed it, they wrote a begrudging kind of statement about why they listed it. They said, beware, this could easily be a bad asset. It's very non-committal to their listing. A lot of other companies also did it that way. So the timing was obviously a surprise, but I had kind of started preparing an exchange. It wasn't really my main focus, so that's Float SV at the time, but I had it prepared in case something like this happened. So it wasn't like extreme amount of all-nighters to get it out that week, but I'm glad we got it out.
Awesome. Yeah. And I guess just generally, so what can you maybe, if you're able to talk about, what the future plans are for both Float and also, you keep hinting at.
Yeah. So I haven't mentioned like Relay X yet. So I took it as a priority that a exchange existed for BSV, which I obviously could not take for granted during the chaos of the delisting. So I think of exchanges as a very useful use case, very critical use case. I think people can't fill up the gas at gas stations if there wasn't an oil exchange. But at the same time, billions of people drive cars and pump their gas, not billions of people trade on exchanges. So if we think of this sector as just a pure asset class, like people buy bonds and now they buy crypto, then I guess this is the biggest use case. But obviously, I think everyone in this chat, in this community, and myself, we think there's more use cases beyond. So I think Float, has a lot of plans as an exchange, but it today just wants to be a defender of the right to trade BSV somewhere. Over the longer term, Float, we want to basically trade all the real assets that I believe will emerge on the blockchain. Today, these real assets sit on many different blockchains. So you have stable coins issued on Ethereum, stable coins like Tether issued on BTC. My thinking is that eventually the economics will be that one chain will be much cheaper to operate the settlements and sending and receiving of these real assets, whether they be stable coins or coffee or sugar or whatever it is. And So you'll see a conversions back to one chain. And I know if that is possible, then of course stuff like whatever they call it, like atomic swaps and things like this is possible. You may not need a centralized exchange anymore, but I guess float will just be that centralized option for the trading of real assets when that comes. And then I really want to talk about RelayX if I can for a sec.
Yeah.
So like the gas station example, I think we want to have like use cases for the blockchain. And I think there's two problems that need to be resolved at the same time and best to be resolved in the same app. And that's what we're trying to do with RelayX. And the two problems are the onboarding problem, which is the entire world's assets, whether they be currencies or commodities or anything like that, currently sit on a non-blockchain, whether it's the US bank's ledger or Visa's ledger or whatever. So you need a easier way to migrate onto the chain. And so that kind of onboarding, offboarding needs to be addressed. And the other part that needs to be addressed is what happens after I go on the chain. Is it I am saving files on Bistagram? Is it I use MetaNet? What is it I'm doing after I enter the blockchain? I think if you look at the past 10 years of this industry, people have done a decent job of the first, solving the first, but because there wasn't as much of on-chain applications, a lot of the onboarding ramps, they served not to have people onboard into the blockchain. They served to have people onboard onto another centralized off-blockchain ledger where you can trade assets back and forth, so like a centralized exchange, like a float, like any exchange you think about. And then it gives you the option to kind of be on-chain when you essentially withdraw from one exchange to another exchange. So it's kind of been limited. I think that is kind of, I would say just like the resources that have been accumulated by businesses in this industry have not been very imaginatively allocated towards reinvestment of what the blockchain could be. So obviously it costs money to comply with regulatory and legal risks. And so a lot of exchanges have raised money for doing that, and they've made a lot of money, but that money has been reinvested into off-chain products. And miners have made a lot of money mining Bitcoin since the early days. But it seemed to me it was very much like reinvested making more mining machines for other chains and going into AI or whatever else they want to do. I think the economics only makes sense assuming you do not have an endless supply of what I call PowerPoint people who like bring in institutional money. Assuming you don't have an endless supply of new inflows, you have to have some fundamental reason for why this asset class worth so much. Then we need to have on-ramps that kind of get people on board onto the actual blockchain, whatever blockchain you want. RelayX happens to choose BSV as a blockchain. And then put applications that people use the chain all the time. So hopefully every user is using the chain in the next few years 10 times a day. And I think Craig talks about people using the chain thousands of times a day. And so RelayX, if I want to really boil it down, is just a mobile app where you can easily top up your wallet with fiat currencies from a different fiat mobile wallet or a bank account, and then begin using the wallet as almost like a browser into what is possible on the blockchain, and kind of try to do it in a way where the user doesn't really understand that they've just been migrated onto the blockchain. And so we got it started on April 1st with a Android launch. It's been quite exciting. We had some estimates about how many users we will have and what kind of communication we would get. Not surprisingly, I think Float SV has gotten a little bit more buzz in this news, but RelayX is really what I'm like even more excited about. And the data's been good, so we're pushing out more releases now. And we just entered test flight iOS 2 days ago. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think you made a really good point that I guess historically no one has reinvested back into the blockchain. They've kind of just taken profit and allocated it elsewhere. So that was a great analogy. That's really exciting, actually. So I'm excited to see where that goes. We do have a question for you.
Yeah.
Which is any possibility of USA support? I think that maybe is generally, I guess, maybe applies to Float or Relay, just generally. I know that's.
Yeah. So I don't know that actually Float SV would be illegal if it offered USA today. It's not something I'm particularly sure about, and so we want to be conservative and just for the time being not offer USA, and USA counts among a number of countries. And that list of countries that we support is straight off of the regulatory expertise that OKCoin has established for 5-6 years. And so we didn't want to jump the gun and just say we're competing on having a wider country offering. Obviously, USA is a very large country, and I've lived some part of my life in San Francisco and Boston in my growing up days. So I love to have US users. I think generally what people should expect from companies that I'm kind of building is we try to lead with innovation, try to lead with getting some user who really can do something new that they can't do before. And then once we've established that people really want to do it, really want to use it, then we will spread sort of horizontally in terms of making everyone be able to access it. For things like that's non-custodial, like RelayX, which is we don't hold your keys, we're launched in every single country, including not every country, but including the US. For things where we are taking custody of users' funds, then we have to be a lot more careful. Obviously, that's a hurt to our business. I mean, quite frankly, not listing Ethereum is a hurt to our business, but it's really a long-term positioning for us. That's a long answer to that.
So I actually had no idea it was on Android already. I just downloaded it. So thanks for.
No.
I didn't realize RelayX was already available. So that's great.
Yeah, that's the other thing is we don't like to first make a PR announcement, then make an announcement about some fundraising, then make some announcement about some people we've hired, then make some announcement about launching next month at some conference. I think if we talk about something, it's because it's either launch or it's very close to launching, like within days or weeks.
Yeah. Well, great. So
I see more questions here.
Yeah, there's more questions. I'll I guess speak them out for the recording. But next question: is there a possibility to get a test flight invite, and how, if so?
Yeah, the test flight invite is public. So I think Apple has a 10,000 invite limit while it's in test flight. So that gives you an idea that it's still under 10,000 users. So anyone can go to the link on the Twitter handle, RelayX.io. The domain is relayx.io, so the Twitter handle is relayx.io. And I think the second or third post, we really should pin it to the top, is a invite, join the test flight. You have to download both the test flight from Apple and then download this app. And be patient through all the different updates. I see another question is like, why do we call the exchange Float, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is funny. I actually personally enjoy floating. Have you guys tried that before?
Yeah.
Where you're in a sleep deprivation tank, or no, that's you're in a bath water kind of pod thing with salt. So I originally, like even a year and a half ago, thought maybe we could power the automated real-time economy float tank network. Because kind of this is a new thing, and if you're a business owner and you rent out a entire retail space just to put a float tank in there, it can be very expensive, and people are not very close to it. I had an imagination when I really liked floating back in the day. I think the idea came to me in a float tank that every apartment complex should have a float tank or something. and you could almost like Airbnb it. I think this is when the whole buzz of Airbnb on the blockchain, Uber on the blockchain, I felt like the blockchain wasn't able to handle things like truly what was the experience like in the Airbnb. Was the room clean, or does it seem like a lot very complicated? But float tanks are like mining machines. Very much there's one model, or there's very few models that you know what you're getting. So you could power a kind of a pay for how much time you're in the float tank, that kind of a network. So me and a bunch of friends, just for fun, had written a paper. It was never released. Maybe one day I'll release it, about how you would operate such a network. That later became an app that is a lot more useful, which is, I think, RelayX. So hopefully in the future you can use RelayX to go into a float tank and pay sort of little bits of Bitcoin for every second you're in there. And if you want to go during rush hour, it's a little more expensive. If you want to cancel your reservation, you pay a little fee. And the owner of the float tank can run it automatically. So there I was kind of sitting on this domain. And I had float sv.com. I think I have float app or something, floatapp.io or something like that. I don't know. But then when this thing happened, we decided to do to call it float. And I guess it kind of makes sense because floating digital assets or floating a listing in traditional financial markets has sort of a connotation with the float of an issuance or something like that.
Nice. Another question would be, why don't you start to do security tokens exchange market, or is the plan to use your exchange for doing security token offerings?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of regulations that come with offering securities. It doesn't matter, honestly, if it's a security token or it's just a normal security. There are regulations. Because I think the reason why there's insider trading laws we can say that there shouldn't be, but there are today, as they exist today, insider trading laws. Because securities ultimately come down to one person or some group of people have insider information or insider control on the health of a company or security, and they are investing in that asset. Means you are being kind of promised a return of some sort. And there has to be a lot of scrutiny in today's world about that. I don't think security tokens change that. And so same way we can't offer to US customers, we probably are not able to offer security tokens in the immediate future. Just to be completely transparent about sort of the OKNodes exchange partnership program. This is a shameless plug for OKCoin, which the company I love a lot. Worked there for many years. If you want to go to them and open a EOS, float EOS, or whatever you want to call it, you can list all the all the EOS tokens. They'd be happy to support that. It's really an exchange infrastructure that they're running. It no views on them for OK perspective, liking BSV or anything like that. But that partnership, that is really a technical stack partnership at this moment. It is not a borrowing of their securities licenses or anything like that. So Float today does not have the licensure globally to add security tokens. But I like to say that I actually agree with Craig. I think he said this before. You guys call him Craig or CSW on the show? Or?
Whatever you want to call him, yeah.
Or Satoshi? Yeah. I guess Craig has said that STOs are really beneficial for the company, right, in terms of managing the accounting, the whatever, but it's not really that big a difference for the investor. It certainly does not lead to extra returns. I think that's just a little frenzy today. But long term, what I think will happen if you have full-on adoption of Bitcoin is kind of a disruption of the idea of securities or any kind of yield generating kind of asset. So I think you could see a world where commodities are a much bigger deal because human beings need to have commodities to live on. And a futures market on stuff like that is useful because farmers need to hedge, things like that. But today, kind of financial infrastructure is very inflationary at a base level. Everyone's earning an inflationary currency, and then kind of needing to reinvest that money into a financial gain of which you can choose from many, many securities. And securities exist because the nature of a firm is such that it's not very efficient. So everyone needs to form a company in order to create value. And therefore, now we have this idea of, since you have a company, why not tokenize the company and make it a security token? Whereas I think companies in the future, if you have a perfect real-time economy powering on the blockchain, maybe securities as an industry shrinks while it's also getting tokenized. So float, for a number of reasons, I think, will be focused on proof of work chains, currencies, and commodities for now.
Sure. Well, Jack, thanks a lot. I mean, that was really informative. I'm looking forward, I guess, to seeing Float, but also Relay. Relay sounds like a really interesting project. I will gush a little bit. I appreciated everything you, the economy panels and all that kind of stuff. You did a great job there as well. So
were you there?
No, I just watched everything I could. So
oh, I did not know there was a video out yet. It's not out
people
yet, right?
were videoing it as it was happening, but I don't know.
Oh, I see.
Functional video, but yeah.
I see.
And I just liked the outrage that you were even on a panel. That was the funnest part, I think, as well. That people outraged and talking. Yeah. So
I see. Well, that was also one of the thinking was kind of stepping on my own. You can kind of state your views a little bit more openly about sort of how I feel about the space. And I just have a little commentary on the BSV community right now, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah.
I think there's a real sense of celebration behind some kind of solidarity because of the small blockers now being on BTC and the second layer people now being on BCH. But I think that's a false sense of kind of community in the sense that you can't get better by ditching people. So I still think it would have been better to just have BTC be the way BSV is right now. And as much as I'm super excited about what Unwriter is doing and what everyone's doing, I think mathematically speaking, proof of work is, or BSV, if you want to call it like this kind of original Satoshi vision, is at this very point in time the weakest it's ever been, or it has been for 5 or 6 years. Based on hash, based on price, based on the fact that there's 2 chains above it that is running on more hash, based on the fact that exchanges want to delist it. So obviously I wouldn't be in it if I didn't think we were going to overcome that, but I think it's very important that we realize how little time we have here to build and stay really foot to the pedal, in my opinion. That's kind of my message, and then together we'll make it there.
Well, I think that's very well said. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
I guess I'll
just like to add on that, if I can.
Perfect.
I think I mostly agree with you there, Jack. I think the real reality is going to set in at the next halving, because we're going to have miners really needing to try and justify their ongoing expense. We're going to see if BTC can't maintain or rather increase their utility enough to support the block reward, or they can't pump the price enough to have the 6 coins, keep the mining strong, then we're going to start to see, I think, the miners shift to the profits. So that's where I think Jimmy and Craig both talk about this a lot, is we need to pump the utility on Bitcoin SV. Like, that's why we're, as you said, foot to the pedal, like building. Because when that halving comes along, utility is going to show the strongest chain, not so much the price, because the utility is going to mean miners' fees. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think that we're sort of, I'm going to totally butcher it, but the Sun Tzu quote about appearing weak when you're strong, I think that's where we sit at the moment.
Yeah, well said. Tones, I think you had something?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe get a little bit more of an optimistic spin. I've been in it since 2013. And certainly when I joined, it seemed like everybody was walking in the same direction. But that was really false, right? It's like there were a lot of people that were pulling in diametrically opposed directions. And at that time, Core, I think, was actively working to turn it into something that I absolutely didn't want it to become. And I only found out about that over time. So today, yes, in many ways, we're at our weakest in terms of hash power, in terms of exchanges, in terms of consistency of media coverage. But in a very important way, we're much stronger than we've ever been. And that important way is that there's a much larger community of very diverse background individuals who are now much more closely aligned on what to me was wonderful about Bitcoin. After reading the white paper and kind of getting my head around what I thought it was and what I thought it could do for the world, I now feel that there's a much larger community of people that share that view and that are extremely interested in making it happen. So you're right, we're running out of time. I think that's a drum we can't beat loudly enough, but at the same time, I'm feeling good about our opportunity here. That's all.
Yeah, I think all three of these points here are good, right? I think it's worth noting that we're in a precarious position, but also that there's urgency. So, yeah, I think all three kind of go hand in hand. So,
I was on the show for the earlier intro parts, so I don't want to hijack your show. Feel free to boot me off of it or continue with your narrative. I'll jump in whenever asked. And
whenever you want. Yeah.
You're the keynote speaker, Jack.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So go on. Yeah.
If you have anything, go for it. Honestly. Otherwise, we're just going to turn this into a roundtable. So.
Yeah, let's start the roundtable.
Does anyone have questions for Jack? I know there's a lot of people here sitting in. If you have more questions, you can either raise your hand.
Is there a link? Put him on the spot a bit.
Is there a link that people can watch this, or is this being recorded to be put on later?
So it's being recorded, and we'll post it probably tomorrow morning. But
I see, got it.
Yeah, and then there will be a point at some point we'll just stop recording, and then sometimes people like to come out of the woodworks if the recording stops, but no obligation to. So you have a question here, Jack. Any lessons from Voltaire's failure that you'd like to avoid for Float? Voltaire was a BCH only exchange.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm not familiar with Voltaire specifically, but I guess in Asia there was an exchange that it's still up and running today, pretty successful. It's CoinEx that also positioned themselves as a BCH only exchange. Do you see these kind of coin only exchanges like ETHFinex or EOSFinex, kind of spun off by Bitfinex? I think number one is you got to keep the costs low. You got to keep your burn as low as possible. So that doesn't really matter if you're VC funded or not. It's just you got to keep your burn low, in my opinion, because the exchanges are very competitive market. So because the blockchain is open, it's not like stocks where only the London Stock Exchange can trade UK stocks or New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. Kind of, even if you are successful running an exchange, there's going to be another 100 exchanges coming after your pie very quickly. So keep costs low. Next is you can't narrow yourself to something that's just one coin only. What I mean by that is not like listing a bunch of shit coins. Can I say that? Yeah. Okay. I don't mean that. But you have to think, like the way Float is positioned is we want to list and be the first to list all kinds of new tokenized assets, tokenized real assets. And so I could see ourselves trading a lot of, say, one tokenized asset against another tokenized asset. And BSV might just be the chain on which these tokenized assets run on, but BSV may not be the base trading pair in those exchanges. So the example is, if you think about, what does Craig call it? He calls Bitcoin a commodity, right? A commodity ledger or such thing. So let's just say Bitcoin is oil or something, or let's just say Bitcoin is gold, whatever you want to call it, perfect gold. It does not mean that in today's economy, we trade, as of right now, oil against gold or copper against gold. We trade copper against dollars. So in the same way that companies like Handcash and Relay, we denominate or display things in local currency, I think Float is going to trade lots of things between stable coins or tokenized fiat, while fiat is still much larger than BSV as the base pair for all kinds of real assets. So that hopefully should expand the pie for us, and that we don't get funneled into a let's trade BSV only kind of exchange. Because I honestly don't think that's all that interesting, to be honest. So you can see our tagline is Float SV, the real exchange, rather than Float SV, the BSV exchange.
Sure. We have a question from Jonathan, who I will lower your hand and unmute you.
Hey, Jack. So I was thinking, it seems like to me that the whole crypto sphere is on the cusp of some sort of like quantum leap in how it sort of understands itself. And I was wondering if you would agree with that statement, and what your thoughts are on that. Does that make sense?
So Jonathan, it does make sense. Unfortunately, Jack dropped off, it looks like. I don't know. He might have dropped off right before you started talking. I don't know if he just got disconnected or what. So that's unfortunate timing. I don't know if anyone else has an answer to your question. I guess I'll open it up. I apologize because I don't know what happened to him. I think he just dropped off unexpectedly here. But maybe I will just transition this here to just a sort of general roundtable. I think Jonathan asked a good question if anyone has thoughts on that. Otherwise, we'll kind of keep this open to a general roundtable. I'll stop the recording maybe in 10, 15 minutes or sooner if no one talks and it's just me rambling to myself. And then people can, okay, so Jack is back. So Jonathan, I'll let you re-ask your question whenever Jack hops back in.
Hey, I hopped off there.
Hey, no worries. So Jonathan had a question for you. I will unmute you again, Jonathan, if you want to ask that question again.
Yeah. Hey, Jack. So I was feeling, I think I've heard other people say this as well, but it really feels like the whole crypto space is just like right about on the cusp of having some sort of like quantum shift where, you know, the previous rules don't necessarily apply and like some sort of big change is happening. And I think definitely, you know, BSV is part of that. So I was wondering if you kind of agree with that and what your thoughts on that would be.
I think so. I think things tend to change kind of at these like round numbers. So I think 10 years in, and the next 10 years will look very different. And so January 3rd, 2009 to January 3, 2019 was kind of the first 10 years. And so we're just beginning a new decade here. And more specifically to the changes you might be alluding to, like I said, I don't think there's an endless amount of new speculators coming without sort of some balance of real on-chain use cases. I think that balance hit an extreme skew kind of in the peak of the 2017 bubble, kind of like the financial system hit a extreme level in the 2008, lead up to the 2008 financial crisis. And so I think you're right. It's not really a cyclical matter. It's not a, okay, well, we had a bull run here. Let's draw some charts and we'll have another bull run. I think you will have that bull run, but it's not automatic. It needs to come after a extreme amount of utility comes on chain. The analogy I make is to Amazon stock, right? So all the bulls today in crypto, they keep on referencing, okay, well, Amazon stock went from $99 or whatever it was, or to $5. And now it's at something like, I don't know, hundreds and maybe thousands of dollars. And that you can just hodl and it'll be back there. But I think what led the turnaround for the company's share price is an extreme amount of utility actually on Amazon.com of reading books, of shopping, and then of AWS. So I think where the advantage is for the BSV community is it has a chain that scales. And then I think it has a chain that's most likely to develop the next kind of breakthrough use cases, which will look unlike any use case so far, I'm sure. And then after enough adoption of those use cases, then the price might follow. But it's really unclear how much of the price, even today, is speculation versus utility. So that makes it very unclear how much utility you have to bring onto the chain before you see a price rise. Therefore, I think the narrative in the crypto space right now is very much changing towards truly building, I guess, crazy shit. Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, I mean, what I feel, it feels like the market is just about to start understanding what fundamentals are in crypto. Like, it feels like the market up till now is totally clueless about what makes something valuable, what a fundamental value of a blockchain is, and it just feels like people are very quickly going to realize what fundamentals really are, and all the chains that aren't based on fundamental will just, I mean, it just seems like they're going to come crashing down.
Yeah. I don't know about crashing down because the market can stay irrational a lot longer. And so, but what I think will happen is, okay, I think the average transaction on the BTC chain in 2018 was something like 3.5 Bitcoins, if I'm not mistaken. So given today's price, it's like $17,000 or so. When you're moving that type of money on the chain, on average, then it doesn't really matter if the fees are $20 or $2. It seems pretty cheap regardless. The real breakthrough moment for sort of this re-merging into a dominant chain, that event will happen when you have some use cases on chain that really are only, maybe the average transaction on the chain is like 10 cents equivalent or 50 cents. Then the mining fee becomes a much bigger share of that amount of funds you're trying to use. Now, if you don't think the blockchain can do that, then the blockchain is not very, very interesting. But if someone can create those applications that requires much lower notionals happening on the chain, then what people are going to realize is, you know, even the founder of one of these ICO tokens might be himself preaching publicly about his token, but in the background using a different token, because he himself is not stupid. They want to use a chain that's more economical, right? So it's really about bringing a bunch of extremely micro-transaction use cases onto the chain, and then the economics will determine which chain wins. And that's the roadmap. Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on bringing some transactions in, so hopefully I'll be successful with that.
Yeah, I wish you luck. I think the good news also is I've obviously worked at a number of companies in this space. I can't really speak directly on behalf of them, but I also had a chance to mingle and interact with many other companies in the space and many other entrepreneurs. I would kind of put people into like two camps, right? There's people who like don't get it, and they build companies in this space, and they're happy to just build whatever's hot this year. And so when building use cases and building utility becomes hot, you'll see them happily go into doing that. So I'm optimistic we'll carry a bunch of people over. Then there's another group of people who actually do get it, who actually do believe in a one-chain world, but they operate a business, and the business wants to kind of capture short-term money and then pivot to this at the right time. And so what I'm excited about is that this community of building on-chain utility, if you can show any level of adoption, let's count 100,000 users as adoption, you will bring forth a wave of 100 copycats or 100 others. That's where you see this like escape velocity hit. Because even the companies that you think today hate BSV will come back in, not to list BSV, who cares about that, but like to build and pivot their companies towards building applications. No matter what they say today, no matter what they say publicly, that's what I think is exciting. It's kind of like the moment one exchange showed that they make money, bunch of exchanges popped up. The moment one ICO happened and made money, there's like another 100 ICOs within the span of 3 months. You just need to see that one activity that captures the consumer imagination. And I think we will get there. We'll look at the timing. I think we need three things to happen, right? Two things happen. We need like the scaling on chain. This is the kind of build it and they will come kind of promise, which is what nChain and CoinKey are focusing on. So the technology to return Bitcoin to a very scalable infrastructure, and then the miners who obviously support that. And then you just need that one kind of use case, and I think the whole industry will follow.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Jack. There are a couple more questions. I'm actually going to like wrap up the recorded section of this and then maybe just open it up where anyone can ask whatever they want. So I guess I will just first reiterate, number one, thank you, Brad. Thank you, Jack, for both speaking. This was delightful as always. These meetings are great. So I'm going to say thank you again to you guys. I'm going to stop recording.